So, I'm proud of you guys. Last week, some of you fought through the blizzard we had last week. This week's a little bit tougher. Um, there's a lot of churches that just called off church this morning. I don't know why, but maybe they couldn't get to their building or whatever. We're just thankful that God has provided a place for the church to gather this morning. I'm thankful you guys dealt with. Some of you may not have bathed because you may not have had hot water at your house, and so the rest of us will be able to tell eventually. We're thrilled that you're all here this morning. I just felt like that this series that God has really given us has really been a blessing to me personally. It's also been a blessing, I think, to you guys just to hear from fellow people who attend church with you here at Quest, part of your Quest family, talk to you about their stories and how God has impacted them. I think, one of the things that we learn from that is that we're all essentially in the same boat without Jesus, right? We're all lost without him. And, no matter how sometimes, we kind of put on good faces when we come to church together with the church family. We'll put on our smile. We'll put on our kind of heart, when we walk in the room. We'll try to act like things are perfect and things are good. And sometimes that's just not healthy to understand or to think that church is a place for perfect people. Because church is a place for broken people. Because if it was a place for perfect people, nobody would be here. Because we're all broken, we're all struggling, we're all hurting. And so the value of each other's story is that we get to identify with the brokenness in others. And we get to recognize that we're not alone in this plight. We're not alone in our suffering without Jesus and the brokenness that brought us to the place where we could answer the call to come to faith. And so I just think that's important. So I got my friend Andy Scott up here this morning. He's going to talk to you a little bit about his story. And he's been coming to Quest for a while now. It's just amazing to me to see the transformation that's happened in his life, what God's done in his heart, and to see that play out in the fruit of his life. So I just thought it'd be great for him to come up and share his story with you this morning. Andy, why don't you just start telling us a little bit about kind of what your life was like before Jesus, and then walk through it with us.
Grew up.
Yes, sir.
Grew up. Not really going to church much. Grew up. I was the only child, and had parents. Didn't grow up in a very loving home, and moved around a lot when I was young. So lived in really small towns, and really never got to know anybody. So it was just kind of me, and just had to deal with things. And kind of as I grew up, kind of kept that persona basically. It was all about myself. And as I got older, kind of rebelled, went through childhood and didn't want to be at home. Couldn't wait till I was able to leave my home and go and do my own thing. And continued to do that. Kind of angry person, lost, didn't know what I needed. And then went to school, kind of made a mockery of that. Ended up coming back home to where I didn't want to be. And started working and stuff, and then was trying to find where my place in life was, and just had no idea. So just doing the young childhood thing, and then one day met my wife, and kind of fell in love.
Was it kind of, or you just actually?
We fell in love.
It was all in, man. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So we dated and then got married, and then the struggle started coming into our lives. We were very happy, we thought, but we were lost. Didn't know what we wanted in our lives. So as people get married, people want to get married, they want kids. So that was the first obstacle in our life. We wanted to get married. We thought that would maybe fill the emptiness in our lives that we're experiencing, and couldn't get pregnant. And then we started doing all the things, going to doctors and stuff like that to try and get pregnant, and doing every fertility thing known to man, basically. During that process, it's a very stressful time on the marriage and things like that. And you keep things bottled up with what you're going through those situations, because trying to get pregnant, you don't need stress in your life. So that was really one of the first blessings is that the first procedure we did, the doctor pretty much said it wasn't going to take, and Lord and behold, it did take, and we ended up having a son. Drew's out in the audience. He was our first child, and that was such a blessing. And then we had a second child, and we were trying to go through life and be parents. Well, once the kids were born, marriage started having problems. We were kind of lost and trying to be a married couple and a family. And so we went through years of just being a family and stuff. And still angry, and I was just, the kids didn't do it. I was lost. And it was tough to explain, but just a lost person, basically. And
So did you? Let's talk about that just for a second. So like when you talk about being lost, and did it feel like to you that maybe like you kept trying in your own power
yes,
to solve that lostness, and what did that feel like to you?
You're trying to do things that the world gives you to fill that lostness that's inside of you, and nothing does it. And it's just tough to explain, but then little ways into our marriage, we'd had both kids. Incident happens in our marriage. Get a phone call, and kind of big shock occurs. And go to the hospital and stuff, and you kind of things start falling apart. Basically, you start realizing that you're putting on a happy face for everybody, like Tommy was talking about. But inside, it was complete chaos. And then chaos would come to the forefront in our lives. My wife was in the hospital, and then diagnosed she was an alcoholic. And we had the decision to make, trying to get her better and things like that. So we tried to do the in and out, rehabilitation, stuff like that, hoping that would work. And she continued to work. And meanwhile, we had two kids, and they didn't really understand what was going on. So we go about a year, a few relapses with alcoholism, and it was tough. It was tough. It was growing up an only child, and I've always been able to fix everything myself. I guess most men are prideful and things like that, and this is something I thought I could fix and make better. Come to find out, nobody can fix that. And so a year went by. Marriage was having a lot of problems, and we were fighting and arguing, trying to make it work. And then we had another incident. She had relapsed, and it happened a couple of times, but this time was really bad. I got really upset and things like that, and basically was drinking under my nose, and I had no idea. And at this point, we had another incident occurred, and she had to go away for a while. So, the decision was made for her to go to rehabilitation, to an in-treatment facility. And so as your life is going on, and all of a sudden this major incident happens, and a decision has to be made. She's in the hospital, and she goes away for 30 days, and you have two kids, and life's turned upside down. And then you're going through trying to get her better, but still be a father and continue to support the family best you can and keep the kids going. And you think by now I would have come to know Christ, but I didn't. I was still fighting it.
But yet you were coming here to church.
We were.
So, yeah.
I was putting on that face for everybody.
Yeah.
So we just started coming. That year, we were coming to church. And after that last incident, it was kind of I didn't know if the marriage was going to work or not, and just a lot of things. And then was coming to church and feel the Holy Spirit starting to hit me at times. Would just be overwhelmed, but never surrendered basically, and continued to try and fix things myself. So the decision when we went to when she was in treatment last week was kind of where the family comes in, basically the husband or the spouse, and do counseling. And I don't think Leslie wanted the marriage to keep going at that point. She wanted the marriage to pretty much end. I didn't want to because we had the kids, and it was stay together for the kids. So we did that. Got through those times. We still were coming to Quest, and then she gets out of treatment, and it was tough. We were struggling to find where our place was in the marriage and things like that.
You said that when she came back, like she had found healing,
She had
and she was like better, and then you were still struggling, lost, and
well, she's going through the trials of trying to stay sober
Yeah.
and keep her life in check. And when the person comes out of rehab, they're a changed person because they have things they have to do, but lots of times the spouse doesn't recognize that person. Basically, they've changed completely from where they were, from the person you know. And that year, we were trying to make it work, and then I think my wife just knew that I didn't need to be in her life for her to stay sober, basically. And she asked me to leave. And that day it was hard. And then we had to tell the kids. Sorry. It's when it really set in. That was going to be life was going to change. And still coming to church, but still putting that happy face on, I guess, good way to put it. But so I left and moved in myself, and then we split custody of the kids, and really was starting to go into a spiral. She was coming out of rehab, and guess what happens? She's coming out, and I start going down into a spiral. Fought at it as much as I could, trying to do everything myself, and then I don't know, 4 or 5 months after being separated, I knew I was going to be in a bad place. And one night broke down, and could see myself probably was going to be in Leslie's shoes, if not worse, if I didn't do something. And I got down on my knees that night, and I didn't sleep that night. And pretty much I knew I needed to find the Lord. So the next day I called my father-in-law, and he was a deacon at his church, and he came and prayed with me and helped me. And then started meeting gentlemen here from church, and started going to Christian counseling, and started to find out what it meant. I mean, I surrendered that night. I surrendered everything I had to him, and but I needed to know what that meant, basically. And 3 or 4 months went, and I could feel a change in me. I didn't feel like my life was spiraling out of control, and was still just was struggling with not having my spouse, basically. And going along counseling, and then meeting with Ray once a week. Then I decided baptisms were coming up, and that was I wanted to get baptized. And so it's a pretty powerful day for me. That's the day my life really changed, in my opinion. Just leading up to that, but that day I was baptized. It's a pretty emotional day for me, and got up was feeling exuberated and just an exhilarance of, the Holy Spirit was in me, and just felt alive, and I had purpose in my life finally, and was just happy in my heart, and something I'd never experienced. But there again, I was experiencing the sorrow of losing my wife. That it took me to find the Lord to lose my wife, and so, and she was still coming to church here at the same time. That wasn't easy. So. Got baptized and became a different person that day. And soon after that, I think my wife saw the change in me, and we've now been back together for 3 years.
Amen.
And without the Lord, I wouldn't have had my marriage, and who knows where I would have been right now. I don't even know if I would have been here.
So like from where you were, like being lost to this place that you feel now, like, can you describe any words, like the difference between where you were before, even when like you thought things were good between you and Leslie, to where you are now and the peace that you have in your relationship?
I feel like you're not walking on eggshells. I mean, just have such joy in my heart. I feel like I didn't have a heart before. Angry and just all that, and now it's been hard for me thinking about this because I had pretty much suppressed all this. And once I found the Lord, I was just happy and exhilarated. I didn't even want to think about my prior years because I just didn't like it. And so going back and where I am today is truly a miracle. And I can't explain the happiness we are in our marriage, and looking back on it. Even if, God had a plan, I think, when we look back on it, and God had a plan the whole time to make us whole and strong as a family. And I know without a doubt now that we'll be together for the rest of our lives.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Andy and I had lunch one time, and he was telling me there that he would be glad to tell his story to help other people. And he told me, he said, if you told me like a few years ago that I was going to be willing to do that, he said, I would have thought you were crazy. It really is amazing what God can do in somebody's heart, but it does take that moment of surrender. Like, it does take that place where you got to get to where to say, okay, God, it's not me anymore, it's you. It's not me anymore, it's you. It's all about you. And you can see like a heart awakened, and how amazing and awesome that is. You know, the encounter with Jesus is something that we all long for, I think, in our hearts and in our souls. Sometimes we don't realize that's what we're looking for. Sometimes we just don't operate with a knowledge or an understanding of what it means to truly, truly, truly surrender. And, you know, a lot of times for men in the room, and some of you men in the room, you could probably identify with Andy's story, man. You may be sitting here today with a smile on your face, but you know deep down in your heart you're lost and you're broken. You've been trying for years to fix everything the way you can fix it. You've been trying for years to find the answers in and of your own brain and of your own mind, to be able, the abilities that God's placed within you. You're trying to fix your life without Him, with all the abilities that He's given you. And if you'll just surrender, it's amazing. It's like the peace that comes over you. But just recognizing that you don't have to fix it. Like, you don't have to carry that load. You don't have to carry that burden. That God is greater than any of your burdens. God is greater than your struggles. God is greater than the angst and the conflict that's in your life and in your marriages and your other relationship. God is greater than all of that. And so if you can just release yourself to trust Him, to celebrate who He is, no matter what the consequences are. I just think that moment of surrender is so difficult. Like that encounter with Jesus, what does it look like? You know, we've been talking about the Apostle Paul and his journey from a person of, attacking the faith and attacking those who are following Jesus to becoming a person like who is like one of the most bold for the gospel himself. And so we've been looking at that journey and that transition through it. And one of the things we recognize that when Paul gets arrested and he's standing here before Agrippa and Festus and all the people of the city of Caesarea, and he's proclaiming his story, like he chooses this moment to tell his story of Jesus. And so you just heard this morning, like, the power of your story. And many of you have been coming to church with Andy for a long time now, and you've seen him here on Sundays, or today you've heard his story, like you know the background. So there's power in that. Just think about all the people that you come into contact with on a daily basis. And there's so much power in your story, and yet you've never told it to them. Man, I've really been excited about what my story has been doing as our small group study we've been doing together to unpack and kind of work through and give everybody a chance to kind of go through the exercise of dealing with that process of who I was before Jesus, what that encounter looks like, and now who I am after Jesus. And that's kind of the process that we're looking at. Why? Because when the Apostle Paul tells this story, that's what he does. First of all, we have to identify the audience that God has given us. What is the audience? Like, who has God put in our life for us to tell our story to? There's somebody that you're going to encounter this week that God has set up that encounter for you to tell your story. Will you be bold enough to do it? Will you be bold enough to give voice to your story? To be willing to actually communicate to somebody? Not just live a life. It's great to live a life before them that honors God and that draws them to the gospel and that makes, what you would have to say important to them. That's so important. But there's going to come that moment where you actually have to talk about your story, to give voice to it. And then you need to talk kind of in these terms, like who I was before Jesus. We looked last week and Paul kind of outlined in his testimony who he was before he met Jesus and all the things that he was about and all the things that he was trying to do. And the rebellion and the lostness in our stories is very important for people to know. This week, we're going to talk about the encounter. Like, Paul's going to talk very explicitly about his encounter with Jesus. Andy told us about his encounter on his knees before God, humbling himself. That encounter, like the Holy Spirit, he said, had been drawing him and he had been resisting. Drawing him and he had been resisting. The Apostle Paul talks about he's on the road to Damascus. He's on his way to go and to have other Christians arrested because he can't stand this movement that's messing with his faith. As a Jewish man, as a man who had grown up a Pharisee, like living to the letter of the law, whatever was happening within this movement of Christianity, he didn't like. He didn't think it was healthy, and so he wanted to eradicate it. And he was on his way to do that when Jesus encounters him. We're going to look at Acts chapter 26, verses 12 through 18 today is the passage. This is the part of Paul's story where he talks about his encounter with Jesus. This is like the crucial thing in your story, because if you don't make Jesus the hero of your story, then your story's missing something. We talked about that in my story. Like, Jesus has to be the hero of your story. The reality of Jesus healing and what that means for you. Paul says in this connection, in other words, on his way to eradicate Christianity, in this connection, I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priest. At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and a witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles, to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes that they may turn from their darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. What a powerful encounter that Paul has had with Jesus. First of all, we see kind of when he talks about his encounter that he is on mission. He's like, when my encounter with Jesus occurs, I'm on my mission. That's what Paul's saying. Paul's saying, I had a mission. I was all about my mission. I had the authority of my mission. There was others who had validated my mission. All the things that I thought needed to be done that I was doing, I was about my mission when Jesus encountered me. And it's about Jesus kind of coming in the midst of our mission and the thing that we think we need to accomplish, to where we begin to shift our focus from what we want to do and what we want to accomplish to what he wants to accomplish in our lives. It's about a shift in mission. Like if you're operating under a self-generated mission right now, it's only going to lead to emptiness and brokenness. It's only going to lead to emptiness and brokenness. You may think, well, Pastor, you don't know what you're talking about, man. If you've seen my bank account, I got plenty of money in the bank. My career's doing really well. My neighbors like me. My dog comes and welcomes me every time I come home. My marriage is good. Everything is good in my life, right? But there's still something missing. Like, and if you get to those quiet moments in your life where nobody else is around, you will admit that there's still something missing. And you're seeking after all those things in abundance and in perfection to fulfill what it is that you seek, what your heart seeks in Jesus. And until you find that place of surrender, nothing else will ever come to fruition. Nothing else will ever matter, because all you're doing is building things that will fade away to nothing. 100 years from now, nobody will even know about it. And then what have you done with your life? Are you on a mission for you? Are you on a mission for God? Paul had his own mission. Like, he thought he knew what God wanted him to do. And so he wasn't somebody that hated God. He was somebody who wanted to serve God. But he was going in a direction against what God really wanted him to do. And so it was this encounter with Jesus that kind of set things right, that turned his path in the direction that needed to go. So if we begin to shift our focus away from a self-generated mission to a God-called mission, then we can truly identify with Jesus as Lord. Because until then, you're still Lord. Until you shift from your self-generated mission to a God-called mission in your life. That doesn't mean necessarily that you have to change careers. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to go into full-time ministry. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to move or change relationships or anything like that. What it does mean, though, that all of that you begin to live in a different way. If you're a person in business, you begin to identify your business as an opportunity to glorify God. And so you begin operating in business as a person who loves Jesus and wants to glorify him in your business. And so maybe that begins to change some of the decisions that you make, the way you treat your customers, the way you treat your clients, the way you treat your employees. All those things begin to shift. You can still do the same things, you just do them differently. If you're a person who has a job and you work for a company, or you work for a corporation, or you work for a small company, or whatever it is that you do on a daily basis to pay the bills, man, are you doing that just to pay the bills, or are you doing that for God's glory? Because there's ways in which you can do that to glorify God. Maybe you're that person who slides into work on 2 wheels 5 minutes after you're supposed to be there. And then you do just the bare minimum to keep your job. And if somebody asks you to do anything different, you're like, man, that ain't even my job description. I ain't doing that. You need to get somebody else to do that. Are you a task-oriented person, as I wrote in my blog this week? Are you a task-oriented person, or are you a vision-oriented person? Can you see the bigger vision of what God wants you to be? Maybe you need to start getting there early. Maybe you need to start seeing how it is that you can serve your superiors and your coworkers in the best way imaginable, and see what God does with that. Because if you start doing that, people are going to come to you and say, hey, man, what's going on with you? Or, hey, girl, what's going on with you? Why are you doing this? And then that's an opportunity for you to tell your story. Maybe if you're a student in school, and, man, you're just coasting. Some of you are seniors. You can see the finish line, and you're just mailing it in from here on out. Don't you want to finish well to glorify God? How hard can you work at being a student? How hard can you work at getting your assignments done on time, working hard, honoring your parents, being respectful to your teachers? All those things that you know will bring God glory in that school environment. Are you on mission for yourself, or are you on mission for God? Paul's mission begins to shift, and Paul's mission begins to change because he's experiencing Jesus. He can now see the light. Paul says we saw a light from heaven, and it was at midday, so it's midday, so the sun is at its highest point. And there's a light from heaven that is so much brighter than anything that nature is providing that it overwhelms the people that are with Paul. That's a bright light. You guys got up this morning, you saw the sun shining and it was reflecting through the ice. You thought, man, that is gorgeous. That is amazing. You know, Brock and I were talking on the way to church this morning. He was saying, man, the sun has been hidden for a few days. And it's like, man, I'm going to shine today, people. You better get ready. Imagine that type of sun being overwhelmed by a light from heaven. Being overwhelmed by the presence of Jesus. It just helps us to understand that Jesus is brighter and greater than anything that we experience. He's brighter and greater than our reality. Even in a place that we imagine, we think it's already well lit. The light of Jesus shines into that place and it shows all the dark places and the dark crevices. It shows our heart. This is the light of Jesus. The light of Jesus overwhelming those who are with Paul too. I want us to look very quickly at what exactly Jesus says to Paul in this encounter. This is part of the light. He says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And some of you read that, you're like, what in the world does that mean? Basically, it's a Hebrew saying. Because like when an ox was tied and he was pulling a cart or pulling a plow, like they would kick against the things that were used to strap. And in other words, they were fighting against the mission of their owner. They were fighting against the mission of the one that actually they were there to serve. And every time that they would fight against it, when they kick against the goad or the thing that's strapped to them, they would actually injure themselves and hurt themselves. So not only were they messing up the mission that they had been called to do, that they were called to serve, but they were also damaging themselves and hurting themselves in that way. And so when Jesus says this to Saul, who later would become Paul, he's like telling him, like, don't you understand what you're doing? You're just fighting. You're fighting. You're trying to do your own mission and instead of serving the one that you're persecuting. So just help us to understand as we see this that Saul, why are you persecuting me? Like, why are you after those who are serving me? So when we're going away from Jesus, when we're not walking with Jesus, we're walking against him. We talked about that some last week. And Jesus said to him, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. And then he tells him, he says, but rise and stand upon your feet, because they had all fallen down because the light was just overwhelming. They knew something was going on. For I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and a witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you, delivering you from the people delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles. And so Jesus now begins to say, I want you to stand up, and I want you to go on a mission now that I'm sending you to do. And this is not like, just a slight alteration in Paul's mission. This is like, you were going this direction, I want you to go in this direction. You were going here, I want you to go there. It's like a 180-degree difference. It's like a radical change in Saul's life. In other words, you were going to persecute Christians and persecute those who follow me. Now I want you to go into the synagogues and proclaim my name. And guess what? You might get arrested. You might get thrown in jail. You might get stoned to death, just like those that you had done that to previously. You see, it's an encounter, a sincere encounter with Jesus changes everything. It changes everything. Jesus is giving him a new power, a new purpose. And it's fascinating to me that he's talking about he wants other people to see. Like Jesus says, I want you to go so that they might see through faith in me. And that when Paul leaves this interaction, he can't physically see. Like his physical sight is gone for a while. But man, he can see greater than he's ever seen in his life. Like he can see things he's never been able to see before. So even though he's lost his physical sight, he can see greater than ever before. Jesus is saying, here's the transition, right? You open eyes so that they might turn from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to the power of God, that they might receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in Jesus. Jesus is saying, this is your calling. This is what you're about. This is your new purpose in life. If you've seen the light. And finally, basically, it's about opening the eyes of people, right? It's about opening the eyes of others. This is what Paul and what Saul has been now called to be Paul, and this is what you and I have been called to. As followers of Jesus, we now have a greater vision of what we're about, a greater sense of purpose, a greater peace within that should exude to others without. That's the power of Jesus and an encounter with Jesus. And that's the power of our story to impact others. So we're going to go from this place today, man, and some of you have been impacted by Andy's story. Some of you were impacted by our time of worship together. Some of you were impacted by the teaching of his word. Some of you were impacted in multiple ways. The thing is, though, don't just leave it with being impacted for 30 minutes and walk out of here and do nothing about it. What's going to be your next step? What's going to be the thing that you do with what you've heard and experienced today? For some of you in the room, you need to surrender. Like you're at that place where Andy was, and you need to surrender. You just need to say, God, I'm done fighting. I'm done trying to fix it myself. And I want to give it to you today. I'm going to be right over here after the service. I'd love for you to come and find me if you want to talk to me about what that transition might look for you. I'm really a very nice person. I would love to help you with that process. Why? Because I love you. I love you, man. And I want you to feel the peace that Andy talked about. I want you to experience that. It's so good. Man, it's so good. I want you to get that. If you're a follower of Jesus and you've already made that transition in your life and you know that there's some things you need to do better to really walk in on a mission or through a mission or in a mission that really glorifies God. Maybe today you need to be thinking about those things that need to change in your life to get to that place where others will come to you and say, why do you do that differently? What is it in you that's different? And guess what happens in those moments? Then you tell your story. I'm going to ask you to stand. I'm going to pray for you. Then Eddie's going to come up and close us in just a minute.